During our last talk, discussing the main requirements for success in spiritual practice, we first considered the necessity of the right knowledge and noted that real knowledge is there in the heart of each one of us, lying like a closed bud of lotus, revealing itself petal by petal in the course of life experience. We also considered the role of some external agency to awaken this inner knowledge and how far the external world can be a help and also a bar to our progress Godward. The next we considered the role of effort, personal effort, the different stages through which individual effort has to pass before it links itself with the divine sanction, invokes the divine energy into its own dynamism and becomes one with it. The third indispensable condition is that of the teacher. It is necessary indeed to know that we know correctly. We may have a body of knowledge which we may not be sure we have understood correctly. We have interpreted it right. We need to have some assurance, some guidance at every step so that we benefit by the knowledge that is vouchsafed to us in the right manner. We also are sure that the effort we put in is in the right direction. It is very important that we must do the right effort. It is not enough if we simply do effort. When you see around, particularly on the spiritual scene, you find lot of effort misdirected, misshapen, miscarrying effort, because the effort of the seeker is not guided into the right channels. So you must have one who guides, who teaches, who shows, who assures. And as the real knowledge, the true knowledge is within the heart of man, so also the true teacher is within ourselves. He is the one teacher, the world teacher, who indwells each person, each form. He is there secret in us, and it is as a result of his self-revealing light and effulgence that our ignorance, shadow of our falsehood recedes. It is His grace, His movement of sanction that is really responsible for our effort. It is said that man thinks of God only after God thinks of man. It is because he has thought. It is because he within us thinks that we are ready, feels that we have arrived at a point when we can go directly towards Him, that we begin to think of God, think of higher values, aspire for God's life. And it is His power, His will that initiates the journey, that gives the momentum. And once we have this faith that it is not our puny effort that is going to do this great work of transcending human nature and growing into the divine, that it is only His push and His force that is working out the solution. Personal deficiencies cease to be a bar. It is only as long as I have the ego feeling that I am the worker, I am the person who is doing the practicant, that my deficiencies, my weaknesses can stand in my way, or at any rate can appear to stand in my way. But once I invoke or am open to the force and the help that comes from within, and learn to be only an instrument, my deficiencies cannot be a permanent bar. The inner guide in each one of us may be felt as an impersonal wisdom, love, power. He may be felt as an absolute manifesting itself into all these relatives, may be felt as the highest self of myself, and that self is the self of all. It may also be experienced as a divine person in any form, in any name that I am familiar with. So there are a number of ways in which the divine teacher in each one of us reveals himself. Each one, the divine chooses the path of revelation that is most appropriate to his past evolution and his present state. But this inner guide is very often veiled by the very intensity of personal effort. We are so much engrossed with our ideas, conceptions, timetables, schedules, feverish activity, that we fail to see He who is really working. We are so much obsessed with our requirements of progress. Whether I am progressing, whether I am doing things enough, and this furious and restless activity, impatience when things don't work out according to our plans. These personal effort in this direction itself can act as a veil. There is a great difference between intensity and impatience. It is a long way, and it doesn't pay to be impatient. It is an empty phrase to say that we will storm the kingdom of God by violence, storm the gates of heaven by violence. It never works. The hour, the moment is decided by Him. All our work, all our impatience, all our effort cannot fructify unless the sanction is given there. In one of our Upanishads, it has been explicitly stated and repeated in many other texts that he whom the self chooses, to him the self bears its body. The self is not to be won by learning, by ascesis, by strength and disputation and argument, but by the grace of the self. So one has to keep the role of personal effort in a certain proportion. Always know that the higher end is the grace. It is the lower end from our side that is the personal effort. When this personal effort is steadied, kept in a low key but continuous, in a steady stream, reliance being always kept on the higher grace, there is a certain calm. One doesn't look for results every now and then. One leaves it to the will of God. And in this calm self-knowledge, one realizes that all that has gone in the past has had a meaning. Even our failures, drawbacks, all have contributed meaningfully to our turning towards the divine. One sees when one looks back how this indwelling presence of God, the teacher, has used every little bit of life circumstance and experience to further the spiritual interests of oneself. How his hand has been guiding through all the vicissitudes of life towards the eventual fulfillment. And this presence of the Supreme is the real essence of our being. If we analyze ourselves, what are we? This physical body is constituted from the atoms of universal matter. This life energy in me is only a current from the immense life ocean that seethes around me. My mind is only a fragment of the universal mind. Then what is left? What I call myself, what is called my personality, is only the ego. Only this shadow of ego is myself. And it is a bubble. The real crux, the core of existence that lends meaning to myself is this divine presence in myself. It is around that the whole complex is organized. It is that lends meaning to this entire corpus. This supreme presence is the essence of our being. And this presence is realized as the master of our being, or the Lord of our being, the absolute of the philosopher, the unknowable of the agnostic, the universal force of the modern scientist. The ultimate, it is that. But it is difficult for our egoistic consciousness to find, to recognize this master within. What is unseen, a normal human consciousness cannot easily accept, cannot easily rely upon, and it seeks for an external aid, an external sign. The ego protests, revolts again and again against this supposition of an unseen presence. But the divine within is not offended by our revolt. The revolt of the ego, the revolt of the ignorant personality does not offend the divine within, because the inner divine has the entire love of the mother and the entire patience of a teacher. It is only a smile, an indulgent smile, that greets our revolts, and the ego has much more difficulty in accepting the reality of the inner working, because God within us works through our nature. He works in each according to each person's nature. He does not work through arbitrary miracles, but the ignorant human individual asks for miracles so that he may have faith, he may be baffled. But normally, miracles are not the means of the self-revelation of God. There is a danger of the ego when it is disappointed at not seeing these miracles. Sorry. Calling in other distorting forces. There are plenty of deforming, inferior forces in the cosmos pretending to be God, having more glitter, more dazzle than God Himself. And instances are galore of people calling in, opening their doors to these distorting forces and give it a divine name. These forces are very clever. They offer themselves as the Lord of nations, as the Lord of life, as the Lord of creations. and the man is dazzled. They give quick results, quickies, immediate successes, glittering laurels, and many are those who are bewitched, enchanted, and ultimately misguided by these distorting forces. To provide against all these dangers, spiritual tradition all over the world provides for an external support so that one may have an object of faith outside oneself. And that can be either God in form, a form of God, or his human representative. That human representative can be in the form of an incarnation, or a prophet, or a teacher. Now the form of God, each religion offers certain forms. There are religions which offer many forms. It is easy for the skeptic to give an indulgent smile at these proliferating forms of gods as vestiges of a past primitive superstition. But believe me, each form in creation, let alone the form of gods, each form has a meaning. Name and form have particular significances. A form always sums up the characteristic qualities of the being that indwells the form. Each form can be taken as a summarized presentation of the qualities of the being. Just as a name is a key to the powers that are held in each form. Now, considered in this context, the forms of the various gods in different religions all have a background. They are not normally imagined by some artist and popularized. The forms of the gods are either those which have been revealed from above to the awakened mind and vision of man. The purified mind has grasped and received these forms. Or it can also be that man, in his upward aspirational movement, has formed certain configurations and the gods have accepted them. So in either case, whether the forms are revealed by the gods or offered and accepted by gods, they have an authenticity, and each form opens the door to what is behind that form. So we speak of God with form. Naturally, God reveals himself to a person who seeks him through form, in the form that is natural, congenial to his temperament. Certain it is that God cannot be limited by form. But on that account, God cannot be limited to formlessness also. He is formless, but he is also formful. Murta and amurta, as they say in the Upanishads, with form and without form. So it is in these various forms that man worships God, establishes a communion, a communication, receives help, builds a personal relation with God. There are 8 or 9 possible relations with God, to which we will come later in the course of the series. And to man, who thus adores God in form, God is concrete, more concrete than you or anybody else is to be. Because you are there as long as you are sitting here. But he is always there. There is a story how an emperor in India holding a court, someone came and told him that you are more powerful than the God. It was treated as a blasphemy. There was consternation that anybody should say that the emperor, king, is more powerful than God. The emperor asked the court learned men to explain, find out why it is said like that. None of them could explain. Only one wise man, he said, yes, he is right. Because if you don't want anyone, you can banish him outside your kingdom. But God cannot banish anybody from his kingdom, because his kingdom is everywhere. God is infinite, omnipresent. So that relation of God is with God is so concrete, real, that there are many who sustain themselves on that relation and progress. But in the very nature of things, they are only a minority. That personal relation, a living source of support and guidance, can obtain only when a person has advanced in evolution to a certain extent. For the others, tradition provides for incarnation. Incarnation means divine in human form. In a sense, what is incarnation? Embodiment of the divine being, the divine consciousness in a human form. In a sense, every form in the universe is an incarnation of God, because the core of each being is a ray of consciousness of the divine. But You are not conscious. I am not conscious that I am divine. I have the intellectual knowledge, a mental understanding that my soul is divine. But I am not aware. I remember when a few years ago a team of architects from Europe visited our place in India, Aurobindo, where the planetary city is taking shape. They came to participate in certain structural designing, and one young man, an architect from Poland, and you know the present Poland is a communist country, so he was bewildered not only by things in India but in our ashram, where the mother was treated as our teacher, some worshipped her as representatives of God, as God and all that. It is the usual yogic tradition. He was completely bewildered. So he wrote one line letter to the mother. Mother, are you God? That's all. She sent him back the same letter with one more sentence in reply. Yes, and you too are. It is the object of your life to find it out. That is the story of each one of us. Each one of us is a potential God, but we are not conscious of it. An incarnation is always conscious that he is divine, he has come for a particular mission, and his whole consciousness and being is geared to that objective. In the very nature of things, these incarnations take place at certain crucial junctures in human history, in the evolutionary history of the universe, when certain leaps of consciousness have to be taken and nature by herself is unable to do it. It is then that the Lord, that the Supreme descends in a human form, carrying in himself the charge of consciousness that is necessary to work out the solution, to effectuate that leap of evolution, and establishes that new truth of consciousness, that new law, and then leaves. Necessarily, there have to be many incarnations. The one who incarnates is one, but the incarnations are many. And we have a number of incarnations, different religions, founding new religions, new paths, giving new approaches, establishing fresh laws, standards, and the seekers follow them, take their word as the gospel, look upon them as representatives of God, or if not God himself, and follow their teaching. But even these a past incarnation may not be enough. An incarnation, when his example and influence and his teaching and power is fresh, is one thing. But after hundreds and thousands of years have passed, the teaching gets old, the human mind looks for a fresh instance, a fresh example, and looks elsewhere. The past teaching, the past example is not enough to inspire that dynamic effort. So he looks And tradition provides here also for another alternative. But before I pass on to the next topic, let us be sure that we have understood this doctrine of incarnation. An incarnation is a direct self-embodiment of the Supreme Person. Whatever the name you call it, he comes with the truth, establishes that truth, and the personality that comes with that truth stays. Even when the incarnation withdraws physically from the earth scene, the personality, that charge of divine consciousness and force, that continues in the earth zone, guiding humanity along its lines, taking cognizance of human calls, responding to them. This is what is called an inner Buddha, an inner Christ, an inner Krishna. It is immaterial for our purpose how far historical accounts of these avatars correspond to fact or not. There may be many legends. Not all of them may be true. Many of them are symbolic. But the fact remains that it is the inner Christ, the inner Krishna, who is to be experienced. We have to build in each one of us that inner Christ, the inner Buddha or the inner Krishna. Everything else is immaterial. And the possibility that each one of us has to build this keeps that teaching alive. I have to die to myself so that I may be born to God. It is my ego which has to be crucified before I can be resurrected into Godhead. Similarly, Lord Krishna, who is considered as an incarnation in India, he is the charioteer of my being, my whole complex, my system. He is the chariot. Instead of leaving the reins of the horses in the hands of the ego personality, I learn to hand it over to the divine charioteer. He is the divine teacher. So each one of us has to build that inner incarnation in our lives and organize our life movements around him. Not an easy task, but still it is possible for some. But incarnations come once in a while, maybe once in thousands of years. So, to provide for fresh inspiration, fresh impetus, there is what is called the prophet. Prophet is an inspired man in whom the afflatus enters and wisdom, knowledge, God speaks through that person. Whatever the person says has a power of effectuation, and it is accepted as a word of God, followed literally. These prophets also are not born every day. once in centuries. But man, the modern man, he wants something more immediate, something more direct, and that is provided for in the institution of the teacher. A teacher in the real, authentic spiritual tradition is not an instructor. He awakens rather than instructs. A teacher is like a father and mother rolled into one. In the Indian tradition, when a teacher is approached by a novice wanting to be initiated, wanting to be accepted, the teacher lets him stay in his house for a number of days, observes him, studies the past evolutionary development. What is the temperament of his soul? What is the mold of his mind? What is the goal for which his soul is seeking? What precise line of spiritual practice would be the most appropriate for him? And after he learns, studies for himself and is satisfied, it is then that he accepts him. And when he accepts him, it is described that the disciple, that the young man is born into his being. He is born into the being of the teacher. And the very gods come to watch that glorious event. The teacher, it is not just a question between a student and a teacher, student and an instructor, but one who envelops with his consciousness the young seeker, in always giving him the warmth, the security, the assurance of a protective shield and a guiding light. He sets the example. This example of the teacher is not an outer example. It is no use imitating the outer garb, following the outer routine of the teacher. It is the fact of divine realization governing his entire life. That is the example. To the extent that the teacher has realized the divine or is realizing the divine, and that is governing his entire life without any gap, that integral realization forms the example, the inspiration to the student, to the novice. And the disciple is helped to reproduce that central realization in himself. Not to imitate, but to genuinely imbibe and reproduce that realization. This is the example. And then there is the influence. This influence of the teacher is not an outward authority, but a power of contact, of presence, of nearness of his soul. In the presence of a real and an authentic teacher who is ablaze with the divine realization, everything speaks. His slightest gesture, his very breathing, his very glance, everything has a message. And those who live around this teacher are continually bombarded, as it were, by the higher vibrations. This is what is called the real impact of the divine consciousness in the teacher, making itself felt every moment, whether you are aware of it or not. You go on absorbing. His very presence is an inspiration, and the nearness of his soul goes on acting. If you have observed the environs of such a teacher, not everything around him, even the plants, even the animals, even the trees, even the furniture in the environs of such a person vibrates at a certain level of consciousness. Such a person does not need to impose himself on the lives of disciples. He does not need to exercise his authority on the disciples. It is the privilege of the disciples or the students to offer themselves, to open themselves, to expose themselves to that increasing light and flame of divine radiance, so that they may be purified, a genuine spiritual teacher does not arrogate to himself divinity. He treats his work as a trust from above. He feels himself and he functions as a channel, a vessel, a representative of God. He is not presumptuous enough to declare himself to be God. He is too humble. You can always take it as a hallmark of spiritual authenticity when there is this humility, humble humility of soul, of attitude. It may or may not be expressed in outer form, but the approach, the attitude of humility is natural and characteristic of true spirituality. Where there is irritation, annoyance, show or sense of superiority, claim, you can be pretty sure that that is not the genuine stuff. A teacher of this type is a man helping his brothers, a child leading children, a light kindling other lights, an awakened soul awakening other souls, a power or presence of the divine calling other powers and other presences of the divine. He is the real teacher. A teacher may be a prophet. A teacher may be an incarnation, a Krishna. But the teacher of whom we are talking today are those whom we expect to find around. The Guru. Humility, authenticity, readiness to function as a servant of God. They are the characteristics of a human teacher. And the fourth requirement is one of time. Time. Everything in this universe has its own movement, its period of preparation, period of execution, hour of fulfillment. And this time can be an enemy or an aid, a resistance or an instrument. To the ego, human ego, time is a tyrant, time is a challenge, time is a resistance. So as long as my stress is on my effort, I will find always time to be a resistance. Once the effort ceases to be entirely personal, but is linked to the divine support, then time becomes a medium and a condition. When my effort is entirely surrendered, becomes one with the divine energy, the divine working, time becomes a servant and an instrument. These are different stages. Time as a resistance, time as a medium, time as a servant and an instrument. For a seeker of the spiritual path, the ideal attitude is to have an endless patience. Each one of us has a long load of the cosmic past. All the knots, all the difficulties cannot be got over in a trice. Each difficulty in our nature, in our mind, represents a long line of development in the past. It is beyond human means to untie all the knots that have formed in our psychological being. Takes endless patience. The texts describe with as much care and as much patience as you take out the grain from a blade of grass, you have to take out the soul from its natural embodiment. It requires an infinity of labor. One has to have an endless patience, but also an energy that is out to win and effectuate at the next moment. That intensity of energy, readiness of dynamism has to be always there, but behind it an endless patience which refuses to be hurried, refuses to be disappointed. In these matters, it is a wise rule that quick solutions are no solutions. They always disappoint. Real solutions, real resolutions take a long time to be worked out and established. These then are the four wheels on which the divine realization proceeds. Knowledge, effort, teacher, and time. Now, before we proceed to the next topic, arising from certain observations that I made regarding incarnation, I think it is necessary for me to clarify that the divine in manifestation works not only through periodical incarnations, which are direct embodiments of the divine being, the divine consciousness, but also furthers the evolution of consciousness in different spheres of life through concentrated emanations of divine powers, of divine qualities. In India, we call them vibhutis. If we call incarnations as avatars, we call these special emanations as vibhutis. A vibhuti, an emanation, is a directed particular projection of a concentrated power of the divine to work out a scheme, to establish a new truth, a new possibility in human evolution. So there are these emanations in the field of art, in the field of poetry, in the field of statecraft, in the field of economics, in the field of military warfare, everywhere in different fields of human consciousness. These are active, like Shakespeare, Napoleon, Leonardo. They are all special manifestations of the divine qualities. They are not evolving beings like most of us. An evolving being is one which does the grades step by step, leading towards the Godhead. But these emanations are particular projections. Once their work is over, they are withdrawn into their source. They don't have to do the evolutionary labor. They are called direct emanations. Now, these emanations, they always feel a certain supernal strength, enough lattice, and they feel superior to humanity. They may be egoistic, they may be vainglorious, they may not be conscious of their divine origin, but the work that they come to do is done. These emanations may come anytime, and they are continuing phenomena.
What would you say about somebody like Hitler then?
Hitler is a special and a chosen instrument of the adversary. He is nothing to do with the divine or God. He did not manifest any single divine quality. He was chosen and he functioned as the channel for the adversary who appeared to him in full battle dress in that mountain fortress and guided him. Hitler thought it was God. It was really the adversary who is still on earth trying to delay, if not defeat, the divine manifestation to come.
Just what do you mean by the adversary? Could you explain that a little?
Adversary. In the old occult tradition of the world, when the Supreme Being decided to manifest, he emanated a few major beings from his own self, charged with the task of carrying out this manifestation. Tradition has it that in the course of their career, they got ideas into their head why we should obey this central divine will. Why not we do things on our own? And they, in effect, turned against the divine. In our Indian tradition, they are called the elder gods. They were also gods. They are the elder gods who strayed. It was then, the tradition continues, a second batch of beings, gods were put out, and they are the cosmic functionaries. And the earlier ones who revolted against God wanted to set up their own manifestations according to their own wills, not according to the divine will. It is they who form the phalanx of the anti-divine. Lucifer and other, they are named differently in different traditions.
Are you referring to the asuras and the suras?
Yes, yes. What are called the Titans or the Asuras, they are the Lord of falsehood, the Lord of death, the Lord of evil, and so on. In India we may call them Asuras, elsewhere they call them Titans, but the fact remains the same. They are those who have revolted against the will of God and want to effectuate their own rule. They function in the universe directly. They also function through individuals. There are many who by their movements, thoughts, open themselves to the influence of these anti-divines, adversary.
Don't they, however, though, play a role, an important role?
Yeah.
That is,
Exactly. The divine is omnipotent, but still the divine allows these beings a long way They have a role to play to exhaust the possibility of falsehood and evil and ignorance. They thrive on that. And once man ceases to give room to the adversary, when he is sincere to God and will have nothing else, nothing to do with the adversary will have to go. Till then, he has a role to play, to test man, whether man can pass through that fire of purification. So he is allowed a role. The divine law is such there is freedom for every being, every soul to effectuate its will. Conversion of the adversary, not destruction of the adversary, seems to be the intention.
There's a somewhat different idea of the place of evil projected in the story of, when the two Dwarapalas were cursed by the sage and they went to Vishnu. They said, what can we do to be as quickly as possible? And he said, you can either take 7 incarnations of helping me in my avatar role, or take 3 as evil opponents to my avatar and return to me more quickly. There seems to be some indication that evil serves a very valuable purpose in that kind of a story. Ravana, I think, was one of the incarnations.
All these stories have a didactic purpose and have to be taken with a pinch of salt.
It always
Evil is there and it can be made use of. But certainly it has not been brought on purpose and design.
I think it's mentioned somewhere in that story that because you, as my opponents, will collect all the evil forces under your banner at the time I'm in existence, and then when I smash you, that will eliminate more effectively the evil of the time. There seems to be some indication that the evil entity opposing the incarnation is of great value in that respect.
That is one of the 9 or 10 possible relations with the divine, to be an opponent to which will come. And it is said also that some have chosen to be the opponent because they will attain union quicker by being killed first. I think these are certain exaggerations of the imaginative mind. I wouldn't give it full credence. It is a theoretical possibility, that's all.
Well, now, if it's true of the Indian religion that there are these manifestations that have revolted, wouldn't you also allow, too, that the devil or the Satan or the Lucifer of the Christian religion is also in existence, too?
It is not, I am not speaking only of Indian religion, of the world religions. This tradition is an occult thing which is beyond religion. It is a Judaic tradition, and even earlier Egyptian, Greece, these traditions also. It is those who have revolted against the divine will, they are the adversary. They constitute the host of the adversary. It is of all religions. Names may differ.
In the ancient Catholic tradition also, you find the devil and his agents not representing opponents of God, because that would be kind of ridiculous.
Yes.
He's supposed to be omnipotent.
Yes.
But they're treated as opponents of the saints. The
Yes, yes.
resistance against which the saints must work to develop their powers of
I think it's a very sensible categorization. Thank you, sir.